Hello and welcome to CX Today. My name is Charlie, and today I'm joined by four prominent customer experience analysts to discuss the latest news from across the space. Yes, today I'm delighted to welcome back Liz Miller, VP and Principal Analyst at Constellation Research, Dave Michels, Principal Analyst at TalkingPointz.com, Patrick Watson, Head of Research at Cavell Group, and ready to make his first appearance on our show, Martin Schneider, Head of Research at Annuitas Research. Yes, it's great to have you all join me once again. So thank you very much for that. And yeah, let's get straight into the news. And I think there's only really one place to start this week. So last week it was Avaya announced their Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Dave, I'll probably start with you on this because I saw you put an article out digging into all the latest on this. Could you give me maybe a bit of the lowdown on kind of the news and maybe some of your biggest takeaways?
Well, it's really sad. First off, a lot of people, including a lot of employees, partners, lost their shares, lost their value, the value of their shares in that process. I'm not sure it was terribly surprising. Back in, I think it was August, the company issued a warning that they had doubts whether they could remain a going concern. So they had a big drop off in revenue. They had a lot of debt coming up. Debt maturities coming up. They had just raised some money, which was under a cloud of suspicion. So I can't say it was too big of a surprise. I think there was a hope that they could settle through voluntary renegotiations. But I guess what was that, August? So 5-6 months of negotiations. They couldn't pull it off, and they had to do Chapter 11. What's promising about this version is that it's pre-packed. So unlike last time where it took almost a full year for them to get in and out of Chapter 11, they're anticipating that they'll be out of it within 90 days. That'd be a good thing. I've got a few other comments on it, but I don't want to share with my colleagues here. So
I was going to say it was one of those surprises of blow me over with a feather kind of surprise, right? I think that because everything was pre-negotiated, I think they've been talking to at least us, analysts in the space about what was kind of going on. They've been really trying to approach this with a kind of, I want to say purposeful transparency so that this wouldn't come as a big shock. And I think that is really indicative of the style that they're going to be moving forward with, because it's not just that they've been talking about the transparency of renegotiation of the debt, but there's been an awful lot of transparency about the roadmap. And there's almost been this kind of sense of hold us accountable to the roadmap that we have been outlining month over month, quarter over quarter. And I have to say that they have been hitting the marks that they have committed to hitting as far as what they intend to release and how this kind of new shift to, yes, getting to the cloud, but also satisfying their existing and on-prem customers. I think they're really continuing to hit those marks. So I do think there is a lot of promise there. I think that everything is going to be a matter of, I think you're going to have a lot of skeptical people because the judgment that was made years ago to not jump in the direction that the entire market was jumping, i.e. the cloud, is going to continue to be that dark cloud over their heads for some time. But I do think that this is a pattern of intentional, purposeful transparency that we're going to see going throughout not only the bankruptcy process, but I would venture to guess moving forward, certainly under new leadership and as they move forward into what will likely be a far more balanced outlook for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the fact that they're becoming a private company as well might also allow them to be a bit more tactful.
That helps.
I guess. Yeah. And I guess it's also interesting, the RingCentral aspect of this. There's a RingCentral announcement that kind of came along with the bankruptcy. I don't know, Patrick, if you had any thoughts on that. And also, I guess, RingCentral's other partnerships that they released this week.
Yeah, well, just firstly on Avaya, I think, although obviously it's a negative story, I think Avaya still has huge assets. And you look at the more developed cloud-based communications economies, so the US, Western Europe, maybe they've slightly missed the opportunity there, but it still has a huge base across those emerging markets where the penetration of cloud isn't as high. So there is still an opportunity to capture that market, and the deal it has with Ring to try and leverage Avaya Cloud Office could be a good route for that. And then the second point on Ring is the partnership that it's agreed with Amazon Web Services. So this, I think, is particularly interesting. And as to exactly what the structure of the deal is in terms of, because RingCentral has its deals that it's signed with its legacy UC vendors, Mitel, Unify, Avaya. And also it has lots of carrier agreements with leading telcos, BT in the UK, AT&T in the States, and telcos all over. So it's what the deal is going to be like in terms of, and I believe it's almost a referral partnership that both Amazon Web Services and RingCentral will be referring potential leads across UC to each other. And I think the one area of the portfolio from the AWS side, they don't have a UCaaS solution, so there it fits quite well with the RingCentral offering. But Amazon does have Amazon Chime, which is its contact center solution, which has been growing in the market. So there is a bit of an overlap there, and exactly where the RingCentral CCaaS platform fits and Amazon Chime fits is going to be interesting to see if they can avoid conflicts there. And I just think it's a particularly interesting deal in terms of Ring already leverages AWS infrastructure globally, so it makes sense from that side. And it's just how it's all going to fit in terms of logistics and the working model going forward is the particularly interesting point.
Yeah. What's interesting, if you look at the RingCentral deal, they're actually going to, Avaya's like taking all of its restrictions away. So as you say, as it becomes like a private company, and as it goes into the smaller businesses that RingCentral can bring it to, if it can deliver on this, it actually opens up its market way wider than it ever has. So it really gives it the ability to go into markets that it wouldn't or couldn't, maybe even shouldn't before. So that'll be really interesting to see. But I think the secondary thing is a lot of times we see these, I always call them like logo PR announcements, right? More so than partnerships. But Avaya needs this more than when you usually see these kind of logo things going out. It's an interesting time. But then it all comes down to the channel, right? And how can you effectively bring this in last mile delivery with partners and others. When you look at, Amazon hasn't had a really huge channel, but Avaya, RingCentral do. So I think those two elements can come together pretty well for the customers in small and mid-sized businesses who are looking to jump to the cloud, kind of reinvigorate get into UCaaS rather than having a phone system that they had before, and take it to that next level. And as easy, seamlessly, and probably cost effectively if we're bringing things down. It could be interesting to see how that develops, but the channel is kind of the sticky widget there, but it'll be interesting to see how that goes.
Right. It's like we actually, when we were talking about it at Constellation, we were like, oh, look, we have these enterprise awards at the end of every year. And we were like, best partnership for 2022. We literally, like, all of us were like, so-and-so and AWS, so-and-so. And by the time we got through all of our own internal nominations, we finally were like, oh, heck with it, everybody in AWS. Like, that was the award this year. It was like, we just gave it to everyone in AWS. So when I think about the RingCentral deal, when I think about Avaya, I'm like, yeah, okay, like they've got more people. I mean, they're on AWS. Congratulations. Like, you and every other vendor under the sun seems to be with AWS. Yeah. I think what's interesting is when you look at kind of the announcements of both RingCentral, both Avaya, there's kind of a common theme there, right? And I think Patrick and Martin have both beautifully kind of summed up both of those issues, which is they're looking to be seen in non-traditional categories for them, right? RingCentral wants to be seen as a player in a category that some people may never have thought, hey, RingCentral is a viable solution for me, in the same way that Avaya wants to be seen as something other than, good old Avaya with all their hardware. They want to be seen as someone who is
17 locations. And
right,
blah, blah, blah.
Exactly, right? Like, they are both in that sense trying to break their own molds that they have been in for quite some time, and they're using AWS to do that. And so I think it's kind of, the timing is very interesting for both of them. Is it going to be what changes the future for Avaya? Probably not. But it's very interesting that this was used as kind of part of that. Let's call it rehab, like digital rehab of their image. It's kind of using
I know you're not confused, Liz, but I think it's coming across a little confusing because the Avaya and AWS aren't partnering, and so you can conflate those two. Yeah. And so, but I think hidden in that
Dave,
AWS,
you know what I mean.
Excuse me, hidden in the RingCentral Avaya announcement was a little detail that I think a lot of people missed, and that is that RingCentral significantly changed their go-to-market. All of these partnerships they have with Alcatel-Lucent, with Atos, with who's the other one? Unify, Alcatel-Lucent Enterprise, and Avaya. They're all agent models, and although it wasn't really clear in the RingCentral announcement of the press release, it was very clear in the Avaya briefing that they changed that with Avaya, and Avaya had said that agent model was creating a little bit of conflict with their channels about customer ownership, and so for the first time, RingCentral has changed that model to include what, I don't know what you call it, a wholesale model, a resale model, but bottom line is it's on Avaya paper. That's fairly significant. And to Martin's point about the channels, I think that's a pretty significant change for RingCentral that talks about, look, we can be different. And I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And then something that Patrick mentioned earlier too about Avaya, I don't think people realize how big Avaya is. And particularly from competitors, I've seen a lot of stuff on Twitter, when they announced Chapter 11, it's like, why bother? Let them go away. We don't need them anymore. They're obsolete, all that stuff. There's probably, I don't know, Liz, 30, 40 CCaaS vendors competing for half the market. And there's like literally a handful of vendors competing for the other half of the market. And one of the biggest ones, Avaya, is, fairly dominant in this space. And they're still, to this day, you could say they've been losing customers for a decade, but to this day, they're still one of the biggest vendors in enterprise communications. And so it's a shame they got there again, but they are there, and it makes sense to fix it.
Yeah, I think it's a great point there, because I think it's about, they work with 90 of the Fortune 100 companies or something. It's quite a staggering number when you look into it, and I think, it'll be interesting to see how the RingCentral and Avaya relationship goes forward as well with the AWS partnership. Sorry, I confused things a bit there by tying those in together. But I think Patrick also made a really good point in terms of, it gives AWS that UC solution to converge with CCaaS, which they haven't had. And I looked at a MetroD study, and it seems like that's actually hurting their retention rates in the CCaaS business. So that's interesting to see. But lots of great stuff there. Maybe moving on now to another topic. Sorry, lots of stuff to cover. And that is a CRM provider in Zoho moving into the UCaaS space. I thought that was particularly interesting. And Martin, I might come to you for this one, because I know you've worked for CRM companies before. What are your thoughts on this move?
Yeah, I'm surprised you didn't ask Liz. Isn't Liz with Zoho?
Oddly enough. Irony.
I think, but it makes a lot of sense. One of the things, that if you truly call it UCaaS, right, and not a call center as a service, or when you look at where the sales element, where you look at even some of the marketing communications, where when we're actually thinking of just more than just voice, right, when you actually take a multi-channel approach, and this is around your entire go-to-market, this is around everything, right? This is like how you embrace the customer along the entire journey. You want to have that connection point integrated with the data so that anybody knows who they are, right? At any time, and where they've been, where they're going, what do they need, right? Why is this happening? Why is this interaction happening, right? And that's at any point, because we have to stop thinking about these silos of marketing, sales, customer service, right? Customer success, right? That's kind of almost a new block, right? So when you think about it, it makes perfect sense. It was always one of those things where CRM providers said, we're not comms providers, and we're never going to do this. And as we've seen with everything, the cloud becomes the great, kind of equivocator, leveler, enabler, whatever it is, right? And UCaaS makes it easier to kind of, when you think of it as a cloud solution, I don't call it to bolt it on, but when it's UCaaS, CRM, and then, if you have a good iPaaS of your own or a great partnership, you can make these things happen as bundled things way more easily than ever before. One of the things that Zoho in particular has is, the incredible tenacity to just develop, kind of quietly, unfortunately, because the the world doesn't know how amazing they are in terms of their portfolio and the breadth that they have, particularly focused towards small and mid-size. What I think this is, when you look at the Zoho version, it's kind of a proving ground at small scale, because they don't do huge, giant enterprise deployments for the most part. I know that might change. And they're probably talking to Liz about that this week, about how they're trying to change that in the back of everything. But it's the idea that, for a small and mid-sized company, being able to have the fewer, both vendor and IT throats to choke, right? And having that kind of either pre-integrated, easily integrated, to basically understand where that customer is, when you're, who they are, what have they done, having that access to the data. It's shocking how unintegrated that's been for the last, couple of decades, when it makes perfect sense. How many times have we looked at contact center vendors that didn't have great CRM integration stories? How many times have we looked at big companies that you would think are talking about CX, talking about, customer journey and doing all these things, and their CRMs and their UCaaS weren't integrated? So it's a no-brainer, and I think we'll see a lot more of that. This is just the beginning. I mean, we're going to see probably more partnership, deeper partnerships. I know my old company, Sugar CRM, made a lot of noise about Amazon, but the point was that really wasn't a UCaaS, right? That was a communication capability, right? In the sense of being able to do some things with some chat and a little bit of voice and things like that, what they call Sugar Live. But bringing a full UCaaS in there, right? And you start to look at, well, so what are some of those private companies like a Five9s, and some of those private, equity held companies like a Sugar, and some people might want to start putting these together, because there's a really interesting combination.
Here's what I'll say about Zoho. I think it's really easy to forget that Zoho is actually a tools company and not just a CRM company, right? So I think we tend to look at Zoho and we tend to go, oh, Zoho is that CRM company, and oh, then they have all these other things. When at the end of the day, Zoho is a tools company, and they do payroll. Like when you kind of start to peel the layers of the onion, they do everything. And that's why they can have things like the Zoho One platform that literally, that small to mid-sized business can deploy Zoho One, and they've got everything from HR, payroll, low code, no code, sales, service, marketing, CRM.
No, it's everything.
They've got everything bundled in there. And yes, they have contact center solutions, but they've been working for quite some time on everything from telephony to web and web video, webcasting. They've got some really strong communications tools. And so it was kind of only a matter of time before all of these multi-channel and all these omni-channel tools started to come together. I think you're going to start to see both telephony, video, and voice really start to integrate across a couple of Zoho's tools. What makes that so interesting, though, is that yes, for the small to mid-sized business, they have that Zoho One platform. It is that all-encompassing, like, you get up and running quite quickly and you can pretty much do anything. But they're also privacy-led, right? This is a composable architecture on private servers. They do not have any tracking. Like, there are a lot of attractive things about looking in, hey, let's be honest, we were just talking about AWS, right? You're going to be an AWS cloud? You're not going to get everyone who's going to say, we never track you. We have no surveillance. We are a privacy first organization. That is not necessarily synonymous with AWS. So now you have Zoho as an option. And when you start to look at the individual tooling and the individual solutions that come out of Zoho, there are a lot of large enterprises who are looking at more of a suites offering from some of the other tools and solutions they have as the underpinning of their CX suite. And they're looking at saying, wow, hey, Zoho's got this UCaaS. I can actually fit that in amongst all of my other tools, my SAPs, my Oracles, my Microsofts. And all of a sudden, this becomes a really interesting bridge piece that they might not have looked at otherwise, because they have that integrated communication. So it's actually a really interesting play for them.
I think it's a long-term play for them. I think they've got a ways to go with this, with their offering. It'll probably play better in some less developed countries and regions where Zoho's pricing is very attractive. But at least in North America, their UCaaS pricing is not attractive. I mean, the solution's not very complete. They don't have meeting rooms. They don't have a lot of advanced call features and stuff like that. So I think that it's a nice evolution. They've been doing the messaging. They've had Click for years. They've had video for quite some time. So now they've added telephony. But I think it's going to be a little while until we see them really pop up on the market share.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know, Patrick. Now maybe we can try again to see if you don't want to cut you off on this completely.
But yeah, I just on the sort of Zoho thing, and I think Martin and Liz and Dave have summarised it. That sort of theory of convergence. So we have conducted enterprise research for years at Cavell, and businesses are already doing this. So 81% of large enterprises have already integrated CRM into some form of telephony system, whether that's through CTI. So this move from Zoho, if you're going to use them for CRM, it makes that integration easier. It's a much easier story across the solution stack. I think it's reflecting a general market trend of more convergent. And the only other point I wanted to make on that quickly was the more different technology solutions you provide to a customer, the more resilient you are to churn away. It makes it much more difficult to move if you're providing multiple complex technology systems to a customer. So Zoho, by being able to provide multiple facets of that technology stack, whether it's through the data storage and the communication, effectively is key. And some of our enterprise research said, and I think Martin was making this point, that enterprises, I think it was 60+% of enterprises that we spoke to, said that they would rather buy similar technology solutions from a single vendor, from a single provider. That awful phrase, one throat to choke, which everyone hates, actually does really apply in this sense.
Yeah, that's a really good point, though, as you look at what, Zoho's always been dinged for being very SMB to possibly even SME, some people won't even say that focus. But Patrick, that's a really great point, because the more they have, it's like the more their life cycle can keep going, right?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I'll, if we get rid of this, but we still have this, that's really why, and that's great, because then they can just keep going longer and longer and longer in terms of, from a recurring revenue perspective.
And it just keeps them expanding.
That's a really great point.
Right? Like, I mean, Martin, to your point, it's
like, exactly. It's like,
hey,
you pick this one up while you're there.
Right? Like, how many times does someone in a Zoho conversation be like, oh my God, Zoho does that?
Zoho's got like over 50 apps. They keep expanding, but their customers don't keep on adopting. I mean, I think they said their average customer uses 12 of their 50 something apps, and so how do they get their customers to adopt more? And the answer is, what Patrick was touching on with better integration with better security models, better adding calling, for example, to the CRM, better integrations. But they haven't done that yet, and so that's kind of and they haven't done that for years. I mean,
I'd argue it's a marketing thing with them. As someone who's been both an analyst and a go-to-market guy, I think it's go-to-market. They need to be having the right conversations with their customers and letting them know they have that, right? Because they can do, and they're doing all the work to make the.
Yeah, I want to say I'm a big Zoho fan. I actually use some of the Zoho services. I think it's a great product. And one thing I want to give them credit for is they do everything in a browser. It makes you wonder why all these other vendors are still using client applications. And I mean, these guys could work on a Chromebook, they could work on anything, and it's actually a really powerful solution. But I just don't feel that they've done enough yet to really integrate these applications together.
Yeah.
You need to tell
them. I will say the interesting.
They've been engineering focused.
They have, and I will say the really interesting thing in speaking with speaking with Zoho customers is they're really super happy, especially when you start to look at that kind of mid-size, mid-enterprise, kind of moving up to the enterprise. Not really, to Martin's point, they're not really, in a lot of the big players. But when you look at those mid-market customers, those customers are passionate about Zoho, of where they've applied Zoho. Right? Like, and a lot of them will apply them in different places. They're not necessarily expanding. But I can remember even talking to customers, 2.5 years ago, and they were using maybe like 5-6 tools, right? Now they're expanding. So I think Dave, I think you're right. They have not really gone deep and hard into really seeing that expansion across their tools. It's happening, but it's almost like it's happening organically, where customers are saying, oh, and it's happening kind of within individual slivers, right? Like, oh, hey, I'm going to use the webinar product, right? And then that might then scoop them into other pieces of it, but they're not saying, okay, I use all of sales, so I'm going to use all of service. I think we're starting to see a little of that motion with a couple of their customers. But I think to your point, I think they're trying to do a better job of talking about that. But they've got like a bazillion different tools. It kind of makes it hard.
Yeah, no, it gets but it's look at sales. Do we ding Salesforce because not everybody uses everything from Salesforce? It's the kind of thing is, maybe we should be worrying about it because that's where they're,
that's the next segment,
the growth. Right? But I mean, but we haven't in the past, right? That was never anything that we ever said, oh, well, no one uses all those things. You know what I mean? So, but I think it's a different thing though, because I think when you look at the SMB, it's like the idea is how do you equip an SMB to have all these things and have it easily and cost effectively. So it's a kind of a different story with Zoho. But like I said, I think it's go to market and it's how they actually just educate and get people doing. You know what I mean? It's a bit of customer. I don't even call customer success, but it's really just like customer championing to like get them to like understand like how much more they could be even doing, and really managing that life cycle. Now again, that becomes labor intensive, and I don't know how you do that given their model, right? It's a little anathema to some of their model, but they got a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah, it's great. It's interesting that you bring up Salesforce actually, because that's what I kind of want to move into. And as Zoho is expanding its suite, as you say, it seems like Salesforce is cutting back on theirs a little bit. It's going back to their kind of core CRM model. And actually, I want to congratulate Dave and Liz for your predictions on the time we spoke before December. You said that they'd cut back a little bit on Slack. Liz, you said they'd cut back a little bit on MuleSoft. And those two seem to be the areas which have suffered kind of the brunt of recent layoffs and this move to refocusing the business.
I think Dave and I missed the Tableau hit though, right? If Dave and I could go back, Dave, I don't know if you agree with me, but like if we could go back and add Tableau to that, I think we probably would.
we can go back with Tableau and analyze it differently, but we don't use it.
Exactly. I know. Yeah. Well, listen, Charlie, I think to your point with everything that's going on, I think that there are a lot of folks out there that will say that Salesforce is bending to kind of activist, investors that have come in and are demanding changes to the table. I think again, it's a scenario where those headlines are really juicy and they sound really great. But when someone bends the knee, it means that like we're all in war. And I don't necessarily think that's what's happening. I do think that there is an opportunity that's sitting in front of Salesforce right now. Whether they're going to take that opportunity or fight that opportunity becomes the big question. When activist investors come in, they're going to say, okay, enough with the overspending, enough with the bloat, enough with the lack of focus, what's going on here? I think they're going to ask a lot of hard questions. And I think what we're hoping for, right, like enough with the experiments, right? Like, let's get down to it. Let's figure out where and how and what the future of Salesforce is going to look like and clearly articulate that, right? And so I think that the reality here is that there is a huge opportunity that's sitting in front of Salesforce, which is to listen to what is being asked of them and to make those changes. I think it's going to be bumpy. I think it's not going to be a pretty ride. I mean, I think that when you've set your company culture up to literally be named an ohana, a family, how do you then turn around and make brutal cost-cutting cuts to your family, right? So I think that there's going to be a little of that cultural battle that we're going to see play out in, potentially not really fun and exciting ways. But I think that this really, listen, my hope is I don't think anyone wants to see Salesforce fail. I think that there are going to be a lot more really hard discussions that are going to be happening, whether they are forced by activist investors or whether they are forced, quite frankly, by the people who are left at Salesforce, who are going to be asking, hey, who are we going to be in the next 10 years? Are we still going to be chasing that we're the not software company? There's got to be that new vision. There's got to be that new dream. I think that it's going to call for Mark Benioff to not necessarily be the big dreamer anymore, which is going to be really hard. And that's kind of against his DNA. So that's going to be really interesting to see. But I think that what we're facing right now is that call to really sharpen the knives, sharpen focus, and figure out really, okay, where are we going to go? I mean, we were just talking about Zoho as the company that's got a million tools. If we're really being honest about Salesforce, Salesforce has an awful lot of tools. There's an awful lot of stuff that they sell. And that's why they get contracts that get expensive really, really fast, right? And they get customers who look at those bills and say, wait a minute, I didn't think I was spending $1 million this year. So I think there's a lot of questions that are going to be asked. And listen, I hope that they rise to that occasion and they take this as the opportunity to focus, as opposed to thinking that they are having to give up or give in to something.
I mostly agree with everything you said, Liz, except for I don't think anyone is concerned about Salesforce failing. They're not going to fail. They're far from that. But I do think the activist investor thing is probably a bigger deal than you're acting. I think that the activist investors are there because activist investors see an opportunity of a mismanaged company, and it is when they acquired Slack. It was the same time that Zoom was acquiring Five9 or attempting to acquire Five9. And there was a lot of, people were confused. Why isn't Salesforce acquiring Five9 and why isn't Zoom acquiring Slack? That would have made a lot more sense. But unfortunately, that's not the way it played out. And Salesforce acquired Slack. And I had mixed reactions. Slack needed to be acquired. They were competing against Microsoft. They couldn't do it on their own. But Salesforce just didn't fit. And now with Stewart leaving, and congratulations, Stewart. I mean, $27.7 billion exit. That's not bad. Congratulations to Stewart. But with Stewart leaving and with Brett leaving, we talked about this last time. Slack is, and at the same time, with Teams' domination of the enterprise, Slack is an albatross hanging around Salesforce or hanging around Benioff's neck. That's going to bring in the activist investors, and the activist investors are going to rein his control. You say that he needs to become the visionary, or maybe you said he has to be less visionary. I don't know what you said, actually. I forgot what you said now. But I think that he's going to have less control. I think that the reality is he's going to have a much smaller wallet, and I think that it's really a shame because if Slack disappears, I don't know where Microsoft's going to get ideas for Teams anymore.
Zoom. I don't know if anybody else has any other thoughts to add on to that. I mean, it's a pretty comprehensive overview from you both, but I don't know if anybody has any.
No, I think Liz and Dave made great points. I think at the end, what'll be interesting is what kind of made Salesforce the juggernaut it was. It was definitely kind of pace of innovation in an important but kind of stagnant, kind of been the same for a long time industry. But I think what they need to kind of plug in, it's like if they can get back to innovating and not just buying stuff and then not really knowing what to do with it, and then driving, a better perception, if not actual value driving in the industry, and then, or, for their companies. I mean, that's the idea. I mean, if they can start to, kind of prove their worth in new and interesting ways, I mean, I feel like they've rested on you just got to buy Salesforce, right? Like if you're a big sales organization, if you're a big support organization, if you're IT, because they were fighting for a while. They were fighting the Oracles and the SAPs and whatever was left of Siebel to create an IT beachhead, by winning the line of business battle, right? And they built up and built up and built up. And now they have that IT beachhead. Now they have that the boardroom beachhead. And they just kind of sat back and we're like, well, keep paying your contract and let's try to get it, let's try to get to the 120% net dollar retention. That is what everyone's trying to do. Right. And that becomes the kiss of death for big companies, right? Because you stop innovating, you stop proving value, you just rely on the fact that you've got really like 300 really good account executives that manage like a few billion dollars of the core business. And then you just think they're just going to keep doing it. And that's kind of like where Oracle went, right? Like, especially look what they just did to their CX business, right? So you really need to just get back to that idea of innovation and value that they kind of went away from by getting a little bloated. The pandemic caused everything to get weird. They got kind of like a false positive on terms of growth, like a lot of companies did. And now I think they can go back to some of their roots. Because at the end of the day, I mean, kind of like the Dave and the Liz point, it's like no one wants it to fail. We don't expect it to fail, but it can. You know, it's so important for the industry that Salesforce is kind of successful and kind of showing the way in some ways, right? And you know, continues to reiterate the importance of investing in the right technology to support your customers and your employees, right? So I think, you know, I hope they go back to some of their roots that, you know, made them really a very fast growing at the time, but also very important and kind of a great company, you know, to be at or to be even observing. So we'll see where they go. It's like, but to Liz's point, it's an interesting opportunity, inflection point, whatever you want to call it. But it's really, I wouldn't call it critical, but it's very interesting.
Absolutely, and it's given me lots of great headlines as a writer as well, so, so it's good for me. Right. But yeah, lots of really good conversation today. I think, yeah, we've covered so much from Avaya to RingCentral AWS, Zoho, and now Salesforce. So yeah, thank you everybody so much for joining me, and thank you to everybody who's watched for watching. Bye for now.